My name is Andrew Ward. I used to be a professional dancer with the Royal Ballet, having gone through the Royal Ballet School. I was the first ever English person to win the Prix de Lausanne, which is an international ballet competition. And when I was at the Royal Ballet School, I wanted to enter this competition. They said, "Oh no, we don't do competitions." And I said, "Well, I'd like to." And I nagged and nagged and nagged till they said yes. And basically my thoughts of this is that actually Michael Soames said to me once, he used to partner Margaret Fontaine, and that is that you can't buy experience, you have to go through it. And as a professional dancer, that actually performing on the big stage is something that you've got to get a handle of, being able to not only do it in rehearsal but do it on stage with a live audience, etc. So that's why I entered that. Joined the Royal Ballet Company and then joined the Boston Ballet. Spent some time with the Boston Ballet, which I found fascinating. Really new choreographers, new directors, new scenarios, etc., etc. And I think that's advice that I just want to pass on to, for sure, is do try and take your art to as many countries as you can, and share it with other cultures, other people. Have to plan everything to the nth detail, and particularly when you're taking touring, you've got to have, I would say, at least a 15% sort of miscellaneous budget line, because something's always going to happen. And whenever something happens, it costs money. It doesn't cost less money; it costs more money. And so I would say that whenever you're planning to tour, you have to have this sort of miscellaneous budget for emergencies, because things do happen. And when I took Stars the Royal Ballet to Bermuda in Florida, blow me down, we had a hurricane, and for 2 days we weren't allowed to leave Bermuda. And so instead of rising with 2 days to have a technical rehearsal in Florida and then a dress rehearsal and then a performance, we literally arrived 2 hours before the performance and had to go live without any rehearsals whatsoever. And something I just advice too is when you're touring, make sure that your ballerinas have everything they need for that performance in their hand luggage. I had 2 dancers who had their point shoes in their suitcase, and instead of going to Gainesville, it went to some of the bags went to Knoxville. And I'm telling you, so we arrived with 2 hours and they don't have any point shoes. We had to arrange to have a local ballet shop opened up for us to get some point shoes, etc., etc. So every ballerina should always have their point shoes and etc. with them in their hand luggage. Never go anywhere with your crown jewels in So as the organiser, I was the director, the organiser, the producer. I was, other than dancing, I didn't dance myself, but I did pretty much everything else. Stage manager, etc., etc. I did it all. But one thing I would say that if you're doing international travel, that actually always make sure that you've got all the passports of your performers. And I'll say why. In this scenario that we were in, where we had to fly over from Bermuda, and instead of going directly to Florida, we had to go via New York, stay in a hotel for about 4 hours, and then go to the airport. And then one of my dancers said, "Oh, I can't find my passport." And I'm like, "Oh my God, what do I do here?" And it probably wouldn't happen now, but I had to make a very quick decision. And I actually slipped $500 to the baggage people, and I said, "Look, I'm really sorry. They don't, we were internal, earlier, didn't have any identity." And he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll sort it all out." And then he said to me, "What's his name?" And I said, "His name is Farouk Dalia." And he said, that's not a very English name. I said, no, but I promise you he's English. Here's the chap, actually his parents were from Pakistani background, but anyway. So I've just learned from that was, do you know what, always when you're on tour, you have to be the responsible one for actually having all the passports. Of course, I then organised all the visas, and God damn it, there's a special visa that entertainers and athletes have to have when you go to the United States. And it cost me $1,000 per visa. So that's the kind of thing that, make sure you've got a budget line for visas, and make sure you've done your homework as knowing exactly where you're going, what visa required, and you have to be above board. There's certain things you can do and can't do, but visas is one thing. If they get a sniff of that actually you're about to do and performing, they can stop the whole thing. So don't try and cut corners on visas. That's the one thing that I would definitely say. And that's where you also have to learn to know in those really tough situations when it's tense, to be able to delegate. Delegate is something, of course, I couldn't do everything all at once, but you have to know when and when not to delegate. And I say that there was one in Corsair where in the program where actually you had to catch the dancer in mid-air when they started jumping, because so they come running on and do a cabaret in the middle of the stage. And therefore I didn't trust myself to actually push the pause button to start the music, and that's why I delegated, even though the fact was that actually we had no rehearsal, but I was literally next to the guy, and I decided that he would be less likely to go and push the pause button by mistake than I would be, because you do have to know when to. But what's the wonderful thing is that through all that adversity, the audience knew nothing.
No.
And what saved us, and this is coming back from my gala experience of putting on these big galas, is always have a compare, so that actually when you put it, that they then introduce the next number, and it gives you time for people to sort themselves out backstage, for the lighting people to do whatever changes they need to do, etc., etc. It buys you time, and it's a way of connecting with an audience that makes everybody feel special, that they're introducing to you the performance you're about to see. And it also gives you the opportunity, if there's something that you're presenting that may be a little challenging, tricky to understand, it gives you the opportunity to say a few words to the audience and say, well, the inspiration of this piece by the ex-choreographer is such and such. That actually, even if it's written in the program, they might watch the piece and say, okay, well, what was that all about? So I think that's another tip I would like to say for those who are putting together shows and touring, that actually is worth its weight in gold. It got me out of jail free with the performance, because if I hadn't had the compare, there wouldn't have been time for me to be talking directly backstage, telling them what lighting, what music was going to happen, etc., etc. Again, it's all about planning. I'm sorry to bring it up, but that's absolutely true. So, what I did is, as a professional dancer, I said to myself right at the beginning, Andrew, one day you won't be a professional dancer. One day you will have to retire. One day you're going to have to do something different. So why don't you start thinking about planning what you're going to do for when you then stop dancing. So when I was at the Royal Ballet Company, it was just as computers were coming out. And so I went to night school and learned the computer programming. It was called Basic and then C++. And so I learned how to program computers and I'd be doing Swan Lake one night, and then the next night I'd be at Covent Garden. The next night I'd be in college at night learning computing. Next night it would be Capella. The next night I'd be back at. And so that's just an example where, yeah, you have to be a thinking dancer, but also take everything that's, be smart about what you have as a dancer. You can then translate it into business life.